DICOM files. DICOM files. So what about DICOM files? DICOM files. In Photoshop CS6, 3D functionality is part of Photoshop Extended, by the way, and all features in Photoshop Extended are part of Photoshop, and Photoshop doesn't have a separate extended offering. So what about DICOM files? What about DICOM files? Note here please now. DICOM an acronym for digital imaging and communications in medicine, and is the most common standard for receiving medical scans. And Photoshop allows you to open and work with DICOM, like .dc3 and .dcm and .dic, or no extension only. Never. And files, DICOM files can contain, by the way, multiple slices or frames, and which represent different layers of scan. And Photoshop reads all frames, by the way, for a DICOM file and converts them to Photoshop layers. And Photoshop can also place all DICOM frames in a grid on one layer, or open frames as a 3D volume, which you can rotate in a 3D space. And Photoshop can read 8 and 10 and 12 or 16 byte DICOM files, by the way. And Photoshop converts 10 and 12 byte files to 16 byte files. And once you have opened a DICOM file in Photoshop, you can also use any Photoshop tool, by the way, to adjust, mark up, or annotate the file. For example, you can use the notes tool to add a comment to the file, and the pencil tool to mark a specific area of the scan or the dust, and scratches filter to remove dust or scratches from a scan. And you can also use the ruler or selection tools to make measurements of image content. And note here please now, and be careful. By the way, any measurement scale present in a DICOM file is automatically imported with the file, and if no scale is present, the default scale of 1 pixel equal 1 millimeters is added as a custom measurement scale. And also you can save 8 byte DICOM files in any file format, by the way, Photoshop supports. Like 16 byte files must be saved as a DICOM and large document format, and Photoshop PDF and Photoshop RAW and PNG or GIF files. Note here, and be careful again, please. When you save a file as a DICOM, any layer styles, by the way, adjustments, blend modes, or masks are discarded. And you can also view and edit metadata for DICOM files in Bridge or in the Photoshop File Information dialog box. And DICOM files, by the way, support external automation through scripting. How to open a DICOM file? How to open a DICOM file? By the way, before you open a DICOM file, you can specify how DICOM frames are opened as layers in a grid or as a 3D volume, and set options in the DICOM File Import dialog box, and that anonymize patient metadata and display overlays during the import. You can also perform pans and zooms and window leveling. And the DICOM Import dialog box, by the way, also displays DICOM header information, like textual information about the file, such as its dimensions and data resolution, and whether the data has been compressed. And by the way, you can import a sequence of multiple single frame DICOM files into a single multi-layered Photoshop file using the new video layer from file command. We have steps. Step number 1. You should choose file firstly, then choose open, then select a DICOM file and then click open. Number 2. Select the frames you want to open, then press shift click to select continuous frames, and to select non-continuous frames, Ctrl-click if you use Windows, or Command-click if you use Mac OS. Then click select all to select all frames. And by the way, to quickly scroll through frames, you can use the mouse scroll wheel if you use Windows, or click the right or left arrow buttons below the large preview area. Step number 3. You should choose from the following options and then click open. We have many options here now. The first option, frame import. Frame import is meaning that import frames as layers, places DICOM frames on layers in up configuration, displays multiple frames in a grid, and enter values in the rows and columns boxes to specify height and width of grid. And import as volume opens the DICOM frames as a volume, and where the Z distance is determined by DICOM setting and data is interpolated between the frames. And by the way, also you can view the volume from any angle, and using a variety of rendering modes to highlight data. The second option, DICOM dataset. What about DICOM dataset? It's meaning that anonymize overrides patient metadata with anonymize show overlays, displays overlays such as annotations and curves or text. After that, windowing is meaning select show windowing options to adjust the contrast and window width and brightness and window level of the frame, and alternatively you can drag, by the way, the window level tool up or down to adjust the level, or to the right or left to adjust the width, and also you can choose common radiology presets from the window preset menu and default lung and bun or abdomen, and select reverse image to invert the brightness values of the frame. And by the way, to zoom, you should choose a zoom level from the select zoom level menu, or click the plus and minus signs to zoom in and out, and to pan, click the hand icon at the top of the dialog box and drag across the frame. How to create a 3D volume from DICOM frames. How to create a 3D volume from DICOM frames, DICOM frames. We have many steps. Step number 1. You should choose file, then select open, then select DICOM file, then click open again. And step number 2, you should select the frames you want to convert to the 3D volume, and shift click to select continuous frames, and to select non-continuous frames, Ctrl-click if you use Windows, or Command-click if you use macOS. Then click select all to select all frames. Step number 3, in frame import options, then select to import as volume, then click open. And by the way, Photoshop creates a 3D volume of the DICOM frames and places it on a 3D layer in the layers panel. And you can use Photoshop 3D position, by the way, tools to view the 3D volume from any angle, or change render setting to better visualize data. After that, the original DICOM file is preserved as a diffuse texture layer associated with the 3D volume layer. For information on 3D textures, see 3D texture editing. After that, you should double click the texture layer to open the DICOM file as a smart object in its own document window, and the DICOM frames appear, by the way, as separate layers in the layers panel. And after that, any changes you make to individual layers are applied, by the way, to the 3D volume when you close and save the smart object. And to save the 3D volume, you can also export the 3D layer or save the file in BSD format. How to view a 3D volume from different angles. How to view a 3D volume from different angles. We have 3 steps. Step number 1, you should select the 3D layer firstly, containing the DICOM volume in the layers panel firstly. And step number 2, you should select either the 3D position tool or a 3D camera tool in the tools panel. Step number 3, you can use the position or camera tools in the options bar to rotate and move or scale the 3D volume. And by the way, if OpenGL support is enabled on your system, you can also use the 3D axis to rotate and move or scale the 3D volume, and you have to see 3D axis. How to view a 3D volume in different render modes. We have 3 steps again. Number 1, select the 3D layer containing the DICOM volume in the layers panel. And step number 2, choose window. Then select 3D to open the 3D panel. And step number 3, from the preset menu in the lower section of the 3D panel, you should select a render mode. Note here please now. The render modes, by the way, that use a transfer function, use a Photoshop gradient to render values in the volume. The gradient color, by the way, and opacity values are combined with the grayscale values in the volume to optimize or highlight different types of content. And transfer function render modes are only available for grayscale DICOM images. We have many options here now. The first option here now, enhanced boundaries. What's the meaning of enhanced boundaries? It's meaning that lowers the opacity of homogeneous regions while retaining the opacity of the boundaries, and it can also reduce noise in the volume. The second option, full range color scale. It's meaning transfer function that uses a full rainbow Photoshop color gradient. And the third option, high range highlights. A spinning transfer function that uses the color white for the entire value range, zero opacity for low range values, and high opacity for high range values. After that, low range highlights. A spinning that transfer function that uses the color white for the entire value range, and zero opacity for high range values, and high opacity for low range values. After that, maximum intensity projection. A spinning that displays maximum values in the volume to provide a quick preview of volume structure and doesn't provide any deep cues by the way. And after that, red blue color scale, a spinning that transfer function that uses a full red blue color gradient. And next, then isolines, a spinning that transfer function that uses constant color, while opacity components is a function with multiple spikes to display isovalues. And after that, X-ray is spinning that approximates X-ray radiations, transports through an X-ray transcends medium, and this effect is useful by the way for generating an image from a CT scan that looks like an X-ray shot of the same object by the way. The next, white black color scale. White black color scale is spinning the transfer function using a white black color components. And step number 4, optional. To create a custom render mode, you should click render setting in the 3D panel. To open the 3D render setting dialog box, you should select options in the volume stylus section of the dialog box again. How to export DICOM frames as JPG files. We have 4 steps. Step number 1. You should open DICOM file firstly and set options in the DICOM File Import dialog box. And step number 2, select frames in the DICOM File Import dialog box, then shift click to select continuous frames, and Control click if you use Windows, or Command click if you use macOS to select non-continuous frames, or click select all to select all frames. Step number 3, enter a prefix in the prefix box in the export options area. Step number 4, click export presentation JPG and select a folder, and then click select. And the JPG file, by the way, the JPG files are saved in the specified locations with the prefix added to the file names, by the way. And the JPG files are saved in the specified location with the prefix added to the file names. And if you for selected multiple frames, Photoshop by the way appends successive numbering to the end of each file name. For example, DICOM frame 1 and DICOM frame 2 and DICOM frame 3. And what about DICOM metadata? By the way, you can view and edit several categories of DICOM metadata in the Photoshop file information dialog box. And patient data includes patient name, ID, and sex, and data and date of birth. And study data includes study ID and referring physicum, and study date and time. And study description and series data includes series number and modality, and the series date and time, and series description, and equipment data includes the equipment institution and manufacturer, and image data includes the transfer syntax by the way, and photometric interpretation, and image width and height, and bytes per pixel, and frames, and these fields are not editable by the way. And what about animate DICOM files? Animate DICOM files is meaning that to animate DICOM slices or frames, you should select all DICOM layers and choose make frames from layers from the animation and timeline panel menu. And after creating frames, by the way, in the animation timeline panel, you can save DICOM files as QuickTime moves and change grayscale DICOM files to RGB and then render to video. And you can also save frames as animated GIF files and then choose file, then save for web and devices. And by the way, you can also use the timeline panel to animate a 3D volume created from a DICOM file.